Shadows, the horror movie Heroes by Clouds, read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 16, Expectations. They've weaponized the exercise. Aizawa groaned. I know, Nedzu chirped back. Isn't it delightful? That's one word for it. Aizawa took another sip of coffee and sighed. I don't think we've ever had fake villains try to become info brokers before. There was one year, Midnight said, but they ended up eliminated by the first night and their info wasn't even very good anyway. So nothing like these two young'uns. Snipe chuckled. If they're in the system, they definitely know who the snitch is and probably where they are, too. Pretty easy to put that in an envelope. But why help the other villains? Mike asked. They're basically giving away objectives. Maybe they don't think they can get the objectives themselves? 13 suggested. They are just kids, after all. Just kids that successfully kidnapped a hero and are in the process of stealing enough explosives to level a city block. Cemento said, I think we might have underestimated them. Aizawa snorted. You think? There's one more option I don't think we've considered. Nedzu sipped his tea. These boys seem to be rather cutthroat, don't you think? The teachers blinked and looked at each other for a long moment before Mike cleared his throat. You think they plan to betray the other villains? It's not a bad plan. Aizawa hummed. Let the others deal with the high security and the heroes, then steal the objectives back. If they can pull it off, it might just be less work than going after the objectives themselves. Nedzu nodded. Exactly. Snipe shook his head. That's gotta be against the rules somehow. Nope, Nedzu said happily. Everything they've done has been perfectly legal, keeping in mind the loopholes, of course. Of course. Aizawa rolled his eyes. And who put the loopholes there? Nedzu took another sip of tea. Why, Aizawa, I have no idea what you're talking about. Hanzu woke up with a headache and groaned. The last thing he remembered was helping that lost kid and him asking for an autograph. And Hanzu's eyes widened and he tried to stand up only to fall flat on his face. That dumb kid hadn't just tied his wrists behind his back. Of course not. That would have been too easy. No, he'd gone through the trouble of tying his ankles together, too. Hanzu struggled fruitlessly for a few minutes before giving up and looking around. He was trapped in some sort of closet, but his captor had at least had the decency to leave a box fan in there to give him some airflow. He did his best to press his comm against his shoulder to activate it. Guys? Team, come in. There was nothing but static in answer, and Hanzu's stomach sunk as he realized that kid must have done something to it. How had he even gotten into this situation? They'd gotten the villain files a full week before the exercise, and all the hero students had practically memorized them so that they wouldn't be caught off guard. If that kid had been in the files, Hanzu would have recognized him. Maybe he was just working with the villains and wasn't actually one himself. But if that was the case, then he would have hesitated before taking down a hero. So he probably was a villain. But which one? Hanzu racked his brain for a moment before he finally half remembered one of the files they'd been given. They hadn't given much thought to it at the time because there wasn't as much info in it to memorize. But now that he was sitting here, tied up in a closet with plenty of time to think, he was starting to wonder if maybe they should have paid more attention to the Shadows file. His captor had green hair and eyes, and from the one singular photo they had been provided, there was one kid with green accents to his outfit. So it wasn't too big of a leap to guess which one he'd just fallen prey to. Hanzu slumped against the wall with a groan. Wonderful. just peachy. Hey! Can anybody hear me? Help! Hitoshi checked his phone again and made his way into the abandoned apartment building. There were scuff marks along the hallway, and Hitoshi winced as he realized that Izuku must have had to drag the hero at least part of the way there. They'd both gotten a lot stronger since they'd met, but most of their training had been geared towards stealth, not strength. Not that he was really trying to be stealthy right now, of course. But Hitoshi wasn't too concerned, considering that there was no one else around, and he could already hear the hero yelling down the hallway. At least he was in the right place. That kid is in for a rude awakening, Cementos said. I bet he thinks he's about to be saved. Yes, Nedzu hummed. The shadows have the advantage of being able to disguise themselves as civilians. It comes in handy. Yeah, that's the only reason they were able to nab Hanzu in the first place, Snipe pointed out. They had also taken the time to read the hero's objectives. Aizawa added, they knew exactly what to bait him with to get him into an isolated area. True, Mike frowned. Hound Dog, I think you might need to pencil this kid in for a session after this. Hound Dog nodded. I was thinking the same thing. Hanzu's voice was starting to go hoarse, and he really was considering just giving up. He'd tried his calms at least a dozen times, and had gotten static again and again. And the way he was tied up meant that there was no way to reach the ropes with his teeth. So his only option was to hope that there was a civilian in the area who would hear his yells and come cut the ropes. He hadn't thought it was very likely. The Shadows kid had obviously put a lot of thought into this abduction and made sure that no one was around to see it. But he could still hope. He perked up when he heard footsteps coming down the hall toward him. Hey! In here! Help! The footsteps came closer, and Hanzu grinned as the door finally creaked open. It was a kid with purple hair, probably around his same age, and Hanzu heaved a sigh of relief. Thank God, I've been here forever. I need to get out so I can contact my team. Can you just cut through these ropes? Then I'll be all good. The purple-haired kid frowned and tilted his head. I'm a little confused. Hanzu sighed, interrupting him. Look, I know I'm a hero and everything, but there was this kid and he pretended to be lost and led me here. Oh no, I know exactly how you got here. The kid crouched down so they were looking eye to eye. I'm just confused about why you think I'm here to save you. Hanzu's jaw dropped in horror, and he remembered one very important fact. Shadows was plural. There was absolute silence in the watch room. Eventually, Mike broke the silence. Okay, well, that's just terrifying. It's psychological torture. Aizawa gave him a look. Of course it's terrifying. They're using fear to make sure their opponent stays off rhythm, Snipe said. I'd even say it's a half-decent strategy if their opponent weren't already tied up. I'm all for tying people up. Midnight held her hands up. But it does seem like poor form to traumatize someone you've already beaten. It's unnecessarily cruel, 13 agreed. Why taunt them like this? That was when Nedzu piped up. Because they're actually thinking like villains. Izuku? Behind Shinso's voice, Izuku could hear Hanzu screaming for help. Can I kill this guy yet? He's really loud. Almost. Izuku eased on the brakes instead of accidentally slamming them like he had the first few times. He was lucky none of the bombs in the back had exploded already. He swiped the hero's license in the last keypad and carefully drove through the gate before tossing the license out the window. Okay, done. He heard a gunshot over the comms. Meet you back at the apartment? Izuku nodded. I'll drop these off and meet you there. Sorry about that, Hitoshi shrugged and took a step forward to help Hanzu, who currently had red paint smeared across his chest. Let me... Sorry? Hanzu pulled at the ropes and snarled, Sorry? Sorry doesn't cut it. You tied me up and... Technically, my friend tied you up, Hitoshi interrupted, and now I'm here to untie you. So, actually... Hitoshi froze as an unfamiliar voice spoke in his ear. I believe it's best if you leave that to me. Perhaps it's best if you're not in the area when my clones come to collect him. Hitoshi gulped and backed away. That must be ectoplasm, the teacher responsible for collecting all the fallen players. If they didn't want him to untie Hanzu, that meant that they didn't trust him not to attack Hitoshi, even though he was now out of the exercise. And as Hitoshi looked at Hanzu snarling at him, he couldn't help but agree that that was the safer option. Yeah, Hitoshi nodded. I'll leave him to you. There was a sigh on the other end as Hitoshi walked away. Thank you for that, at least. End of chapter.